And we're going to begin with the Derek Chauvin trial. The judge overseeing the trial of the former Minneapolis police officer accused of killing George Floyd has paused jury selection for at least a day. This comes as an appeal proceeds over the possible reinstatement of a third-degree murder charge. Hundreds of protesters gathered outside a courthouse Monday to call for the conviction of Chauvin, who was seen forcibly kneeling on Floyd's neck for several minutes last spring, leading to the officer's firing as well as manslaughter and murder charges. The incident sparked protests around the world against police brutality and racial injustice. And for more on this, I want to bring in Bloomberg Government's Adam Taylor, who's been following this trial closely. Thank you so much for joining us, Adam. I know that you've been covering this deeply. Can you tell us the latest news from today?
Thanks for having me. As you said, today was something of a false start to proceedings, as it became apparent really early in the day that the planned start to jury selection would need to be pushed back. Judge Peter Cahill has now adjourned proceedings until tomorrow night after they did some motions practice. But it's possible that proceedings are delayed further when tomorrow arrives.
And tell me about why. Why were these jury selections delayed?
It actually goes back to the charges against Derek Chauvin. If you recall, when they were first announced back in June, it was third-degree murder and manslaughter. They later added second-degree murder, which is a higher charge than third-degree. Because of how Minnesota defines murder 3, Judge Cahill later struck that charge last fall. But a recent Minnesota Court of Appeals case potentially broadens the scope of those charges. So the prosecution asked the judge to reinstate them. He declined. That was appealed to the Minnesota Court of Appeals, which told him to reconsider. And the defense is now appealing that appeals court ruling to the state Supreme Court. Until that question is settled on murder 3, Cahill doesn't have jurisdiction to touch that charge, to do any proceedings on that charge. The prosecution wants to wait until everything can go forward together, including jury selection. And today they asked the appeals court to freeze proceedings in the trial until the Minnesota Supreme Court can weigh in. So Cahill sent the jury pool home this morning until he gets some guidance on that question.
A lot of back and forth there. Can you tell me about, this is such a high-profile trial. How difficult will the jury selection process be, and what might that timeline look like?
It's going to be tricky, and that's why they've budgeted 3 weeks for jury selection. The goal in any trial is to get an unbiased jury that's representative of the community, and that's especially difficult in a case that's received the publicity that this one has. As you said at the top, there were peaceful demonstrations going on outside the courthouse even today. All the prospective jurors in the pool have been given questionnaires asking about whether they've already seen the bystander video of George Floyd's death, whether they marched in Black Lives Matter protest, what their media consumption is, what podcasts and news they are consuming. And those answers won't automatically disqualify them by any means, but it will inform the prosecution and the defense on how they want to use their challenges and disqualify jurors. And it might be even harder now with the pandemic, because they're going to have to question jurors one at a time instead of doing a group voir dire, which would make things a bit more efficient.
Really interesting you point out the effects of COVID. I know you said that jury selection could take 3 weeks. More broadly, how long could this entire trial take, potentially?
So we're expecting opening statements around March 29th. After that, I think most of us are expecting about a 2 to 4 week trial before we get to closing statements. And then it goes to the jury, at which point all bets are off. They will take as long or as short as they need to reach a unanimous decision.
And the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, has pointed out that this is going to be a hard case to win. So can you tell me about the AG's approach here and what his strategy looks like for approaching this case?
Yeah, the prosecution has to show that Derek Chauvin's actions not only caused George Floyd's death, something the defense has already signaled they're going to contest, citing Floyd's health conditions and drug use, but also the prosecution will have to show that the knee hold on Floyd's neck was not a reasonable use of force and went against the police manual. Now, the standards for the different charges are all a little bit different, and that's part of why the prosecution is pushing to get third-degree murder reinstated as a charge. If they can't convince the jury on the second-degree murder charge, they could get the lesser included third-degree charge or manslaughter and still get a conviction in the case, even if it's not for the highest charge.
And one more question for you while I have you, Adam. In Minnesota, 0 white officers have been convicted for the killings of Black individuals. Can you talk to me about the huge precedent that this case has the power to set moving forward?
It would potentially be a culmination of the Black Lives Matter protests that we've seen over the last almost year. It's hard to say what the practical effects would be down the line, whether prosecutors would be more likely to charge in these cases involving police violence. But you have to imagine that the movement that has come to the fore would feel vindicated and energized by a conviction in this case.
Bloomberg Government's Adam Taylor, thank you so much for breaking that down for us.
The biggest stories the moment they happen from around the globe. Subscribe to Bloomberg Quick Take now for insight in an instant.